Welcome to Headlines. This is David Lichtenstein, and this week we are going to have a guest host, Rabbi Pfeffer. He's with a Chaver Bezdin on the Bezdin of Rabbi Weiss. He has many other attributes. He's been with us many times. He's going to be hosting the program. It's going to be talking about Bezdin. Should we have To'anim? Choosing the right Bezdin. Building confidence in the Bezdin system after so much corruption. Should we have an appellate system? Many other contemporary Bezdin shilas the guests will have from the Bezdin Rabbi Weiss, the famous Rabbi Tzvi Gartner, he's a famous Dayan. We will have Rabbi Shmuel Honigwachs and Rabbi Yaakov Tesla from the Bais Havaad and Rabbi Tuvya Stern. We will have both Dayanim, a lawyer in Yerushalayim. Should be a fascinating program. Before we begin, I do want to mention a number of interesting things. We will have a number of very interesting topics coming up in the next few weeks. We'll be talking about kashrus, the difference in halacha and as well as competence between the major hechsherim, both in Eretz Yisrael and in America here where we live. We'll be talking about marriage. Are we educating our children enough? I mean, the boys are coming from one place, one total place. Many of the boys use internet. We've had Rosh Hashiva say they live on the internet, maybe in places they shouldn't have gone. We have girls who are coming from seminary with stars in their eyes. Is a half an hour schmooze, chassan schmooze, really do it? I mean, before you drive, can you get a half an hour course and jump into a car? Should we be having maybe a 10 or a 15-hour course? Should we be teaching our boys? Is it ever an appropriate time to leave Kel? We will have on a really big guide, a big lamdan who's going to talk about that. We're going to be talking about alternative medicine, kinesiology. Some say it's avodah zarah, some swear by it. We'll be talking about many other interesting and contemporary topics. While we're talking about contemporary topics, I want to share with you a vart. In this week's parsha, last week's parsha, depending on when you're living, it says after Yaakov has his epic battle with the archangel Sarai Shalesav, what does he say? Vayishal Yaakov, Yaakov es v'yomer Hagita no shemecha. I want to know your name. And what does he answer? He says, Lama zeh tishal l'shmi. Question: why did Yaakov want to know his name? I mean, let's say he would have said, my name is Zalman or Beryl or Yankel. I mean, what would have Yaakov done with it? He would have put it in his Rolodex. Like Lamay Nafkamina. And if he really wanted his name, what does he say? Lama zeh tishal l'shmi. I mean, Yaakov had him by the neck. He had to go say Shira. He was begging to leave. Just like he asked him for the bracha. He should have said, also, I want to know your name. But Yaakov seems satisfied, and he lets him go. So it's not the first time. It's the first time. It's not the only time you have this shaila. By Manoach, he also asks the malach, Mishemecha, what's your name? But the pasuk says why? Ki yavai, I want to know your name so that when you come, when we hear your name, we should be able to be mechabed you. Ki yavai v'chabducha. In other words, he was asking, what's your handle so that I could use it in the future? So what is Yaakov asking him? He's saying, you're Sarai Shalesav, and I defeated you. But Kol Yisrael is going to have many times we're going to battle. Who are Yetzirah? Who are Satan? Who are Malach HaMavis? We're going to keep bumping into you. So what is your name? How can I pass on to your children? When somebody comes with this and this name, we should be able to tell him, this is the Satan, it's the Malach HaMavis here. So what does he answer him? He answers him, Lama zeh tishal l'shmi. So what does the Medrash say? Don't ask me my name, because my name keeps changing. What does that mean? 3,500 years ago, 4,000 years ago, maybe his name was Esav. Then it became Lavan. Then it became Parai, Izevel. It became Alexandra Muktin. Was it Antiochus? Was it Hellenism? Was it Trianus? Aspanionus? Was it Titus, who destroyed the second Bais? Was it Paulus? Was it Chelmenitsky? Right? Do you know that when they destroyed the yeshiva in Volozhin, they closed Volozhin in the late 18th century. They said that there were 5 kittim in the yeshiva when they closed the yeshiva. There were the Baalei Musa, the Bundists, the Marxists, the Zionists, and the Communists. 5 different groups. I asked you, that was the battle, and ultimately Volozhin collapsed. There was no way to keep it open anymore. I asked you, do you know anybody who became a Bundist Do you know a Bach who had a Yetzirah to become a Marxist? Right? So it keeps changing. So he says, the Malach tells him, he says, Yaakov, you want to know what I look like? You know what? Your Rabbanim, your Gedolim, they're going to have to be very smart and I keep morphing like a virus. Every virus, they keep needing new antibiotics because the virus has morphed. Do you know that in World War I, it was primarily between France and Germany, right? It was a trench warfare. And it moved by inches, literally. They would slog it. They'd advance 100 feet. They'd back up. People dug. It was trenches. So there was a French minister who built something. His name was Maginot, Maginot. He built the Maginot line. It was considered a marvel. It cost them, in today's, $50 billion. It drained the French economy. It was a series of trenches, of bunkers between France and Germany that were air conditioned. They had and they were indestructible by artillery, shells. So what did that mean? He said, nobody will ever pass the Maginot line. France is secure. What they didn't realize is weapons had changed. The Second World War was not about trenches anymore. It was about blitzkrieg. These Tiger tank corps, they moved at 40, 50 miles an hour. They raced. It was about planes. It was ultimately about jets. It was about aerial warfare. Trenches became much less important. What did the Germans do? They they didn't attack the Maginot line. They went through Brussels. They came through the top of France. France fell in a couple of weeks. When they asked the prime minister, "What's with the Maginot line?" he said, "It isn't anymore. It was a relic of history." Battles change. Are we fighting yesterday's battles, or rather today's battles, with yesterday's tools? That's what the Malach says. Why do you want to know my name? You better. I had a fellow. He came to me. He's a Chassidish fellow. He's Chassidus. He says, my Rebbe for the last 25 years talks about one thing. He said, what is it? He says, "Medaf achte geben von de goyim." You have to be careful, nicht sich abzulernen, that not to have anything to do with goyim. He says, don't talk to a goyim. Do you know anybody who, because that episode Hatzaton mit goyim, something happened to it? Is that the battle we're facing today? You ask a yeshiva bacher today, what's a Yetzirah, or a married person, or a balabas? Is your problem that the goyim, the goyim are doing something to you? We have totally different set of problems. Are people's marriages failing because of goyim? Do you know that Rabbi Yoshiber said, even though the kalim of the Beis Hamikdash never changed, but the chatzaitzres changed. Every melech brought in his own chatzaitzres. So Rabbi Yoshiber said, the avodah never changes. What's the chatzaitzres? The chatzaitzres are the trumpets, the clarions, the call to avodah, the call to service. He says the call to service, what inspires you? Every generation, every melech has to find the inspiration of that generation. What's talking to that generation? Our program this month, something amazing happened. We had 100,000 downloads. What did we speak about? We spoke about vaccines and halacha, dating and halacha, marijuana and halacha. We spoke about Brett Kavanaugh. If you would have a Rav who would be accused, somebody from 35 years ago would accuse him. And you know what? 100,000 people downloaded the program. We ordered it. We know exactly how many from online, how many from the telephone, how many from the app. It's not a guess. We actually know every time somebody calls in. Because why? Because people want their Torah to be relevant. So when he says, Hagidili Mashemecha, what's your name? I want some sign. He says, you know what? Lama Zetisha Lishmi. When it comes to our children, we have to be constant ourselves. What talks us? How do we find something in the Torah that talks to my current situation, that I could address some tzara that I have in life, some type of a tzara, or maybe some type of a moral dilemma? How do I deal with it? What is the appropriate answer? He says, Lama, you have to keep searching and find them. There is no one recipe. The Torah, the Sari Shalesa says, you know what, you better always be relevant because I'm going to keep changing. Let me share with you one more thought before we go on. And I think it's a very relevant thought. In the parasha it says Leah is called Snua. Vayara Hashem ki Snua Leah. She's not called Snua once. When Shimon says, Ki Shama Hashem Ki Snua Anochi, I am hated. So it's interesting. The Rishonim debate was she really hated or not. The Ravid says no, she was hated next to. But the Rush and the Daskenim, Balei Tosfos, and others say no, she was literally, Yaakov didn't like her. So the Zohar HaKadosh asks, what's the purpose of telling us this? Why do we have to know that Leah was Snua? The Zohar is in Kufnun Daled Amud Beis. Here's how I understand what the Zohar and the Mefarshim are saying. You know, ask a lot of people, like, why aren't you successful? And they'll start telling you, you know, childhood. Let's start from the beginning. My mother and my father, this was not a marriage made in heaven, let me tell you. In general, childhood, you know, you see people, they have like an idyllic childhood, like from the Bobbsey twins or the Brady Bunch. It's mamish, and everything's going wonderful, and the parents believe in them, and they're mechazik them. So therefore, they have the leiv of an Ari, and they're able to go. My story, you know, I wasn't so lucky. You know, only 25 or 30% of marriages, by the way, are considered really happy marriages. Most people don't put the effort in that they need, right? So that means most of us come. So that therefore, I'm not so successful. It's not my fault. I don't have such self-confidence. You know, right? So the Zohar HaKadosh says, you know what? Even Masu Haboinim, the best children. Who is the basis? Who's Malchus by Israel? They had two sets of children, 7 children to Leah, the one who was called Snua, and 2 children to Rachel. Yaakov was in love with Rachel. Right? The Yaakov oheves Rachel. Constantly says how much he loves Rachel. Leah was Snua. Yosef comes. It's true. Yosef, the dreamer, he grew up in that perfect house, and everything was right. His mother loved him. His father loved him. V'Yisrael oheves Yosef mikol banav. The mother he loved, the child he loved. He got all the emotional support. He was able to be a dreamer, to have visions and dreams. It's wonderful. There are children like that. But what about Leah? Is called the Eim Habanim. And what do we know about her? Who comes from Leah? The unhappy marriage, the lack of Shalom Bais, right? To a certain extent, the disinherited one, they lost the Bechayah, right? Who does it go to? Well, let's look at it. Kahuna, Leviah, all the Malamdim of Klal Yisrael come from Shimon. Malchus comes from Yehuda. Bezdin comes from Yisachar. Zvulun, prosperity comes from him. What does that mean? You know what the Torah is telling you? It says by Yaakov Avinu, the Mefarshim, well, the Kli Yakar, the Reb Chaim Volozhin, it says Avram Avinu had a child to 99. Why does it tell us? You know what? You're going to have difficulty having children. Avram had to 99. You're going to have issues where you live. Avram went to war. You're going to have issues with your children. Avram struggled with difficult children. Why does it tell us Yaakov and the difficulty, Snua Leah? You know why? You come from that. Your background, you know, your family wasn't like from the Bobbsey twins. You know what? It's no excuse. Ruvain, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, all of them. The foundation of Klal Yisrael. It doesn't matter. You had a loving parent. Somebody loved you. That's enough. You don't need some picture perfect thing, which is really 70% of all people. You know, it's interesting. Certainly 2 of the most successful and greatest minds of our generation, are Steve Jobs. Let's face it, the iPhone changed the world. Apps changed the world, right? And Jeff Bezos, Amazon changed shopping. I know my kids, me myself, I practically never go to a store anymore. You get on the thing, you deliver whatever you want to. Do you know both of them were abandoned by their parents? It's true. Look it up. Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, both were abandoned. Both were adopted. So what does that mean? That's what the Zohar HaKadosh says. The Bnei Hasnua, they were the ones, Lamaisa, by Klal Yisrael, they became the greatest. So if your family, where you come from, wasn't this idyllic, perfect picture like like a chocolate bar, like a Swiss chocolate bar, you know, the cow and the mountain with the snow on the top. If you didn't grow up that way, you know what? Welcome. What does Chazal say? It says, Klal Yisrael is nimshal zayis. Just like a zayis, the more you press it, the more oil comes out of it. So too Klal Yisrael, the more you stress them, the more they produce. It's not just that, wine too. Gefen mimitzrayim tasiyah. You take the beautiful grape, you put it into a thing, you jump on it, you crush it, you ferment it, it becomes the most amazing thing. That's what the Zohar HaKadosh says we learn from the story of Leah. And by the way, if you want to see the Rosh and the Das Kainim, and the Pasuk Yil is Shnei Nashim Achas Huva V'Achasnu and Parshas Kisei, both the Rosh and the Balei Taisa say it's talking about Yaakov and it's being Meramis on Yaakov and Leah. So all we need is one supportive adult, and we can accomplish anything. Let's go to our riddle of the week. Since last week was about vaccinations, I thought I would ask a kasha, that a riddle that has a little to do with vaccinations from the Parsha. The great Pri Megadim, the holy Pri Megadim, could spend hours and hours trying to understand the oimek of the Pri Megadim. Ask the kasha. He says, Yosef knew his brothers hated him. It's Pfeffer in the whatchamacallit. First of all, the Torah says v'yisnu snoi say, and the Sefer Hasidim says he knew they meant his harm. So he says, how was he allowed to, even for kibbud aveim, how was he allowed to go and put himself in their clutches? He says, you're over two. One is somebody who's mesakin atzma, who puts himself in a place of danger, is over on the pasuk of Yishamar Lecha, and also on the pasuk of Leisasim Damim B'Veisecha. If you put yourself in a place of danger, maybe by not being vaccinated, that's a debate, but certainly Yosef, he says he's over to lavim, Yishamar Lecha, and Leisasim Damim, Anasei and Eloises. He says, even though there's a mitzvah of kibbud av, you're not allowed to be over to averis for kibbud av the aim. So that is the question of the great Pri Megadim, and I leave that to you to come up with an answer. Let's go to our fabulous host, Hagoyin Rabbi Yehosua Pfeffer.
Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Headlines to Yeshiva Shomayla. My name is Yehosua Pfeffer, filling in for Rav David, and this week we're going to be speaking about a very contemporary, very relevant, and very universal issue of Batei Din, of Bais, which is a Jewish court of law, rabbinic court of law, that comes to adjudicate between two different litigants, between two parties. Even as Yidden, and of course we encourage achdus between us, and we encourage unity in Klal Yisrael, but we're still human beings, and as human beings and as functional human societies, we all have disputes, we have occasional disagreements and clashes, arguments, and some of them involve financial ramifications. This is something that all of us have, and all human societies have throughout history. And of course, there are many ways that people resolve these disputes by. Trial by jury is common today. Trial by judge, trial by combat, or trial by duel. Many different ways. The Torah tells us what it's the way that the Jewish people, those who are nem and those who are faithful to the Torah, ought to resolve their disputes is by means of going to the shofet, going to the judge. Ki yiparim imcha davar lemishpat, bein dam ledam, bein din ledin, bein nega lenega v'chulei, and then v'kam savei alisa, you should go up to the makom asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo, and there you find kehanim levim v'la shofet asher yeh bayamim ahem. And of course, today we don't have the mikdash, we don't have the Beit HaGadol in Yerushalayim, but we have the Batei Din that Chazal speak about in every community, in every city. Chazal tell us, the Gemara tells us in Maseches Gittin, that's in the pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, ve'ela mishpatim asher tosim lifneim. So the Gemara tells us lifneim v'lo lifnei ovdei kechavim, and from here we learn the issa to go to arkais, to go to non-Jewish courts of law, and when we have a dispute that requires a resolution, then our chiyuv, our pidin, is to go to din Torah, to go to Dayanim, who will give us a judgment based on din Torah. We all know the lashon of the Rambam, very severe lashon of the Rambam in the end of Hilchos Sanhedrin, also brought in the Shulchan Aruch in the beginning of Choshen Mishpat. And the Rambam said that someone who comes to non-Jewish courts of law, he says Hareza Rasha, he says Kilu Chire Fegide Vehirim Yad B'Tiras Moshe Rabbeinu Alav Shalom. So we know it's a very severe issur, and we know that the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Gimel speaks about the chiyuv to come before three dayanim It's possible also to go to a Dan Yachid, but generally we go to a panel of 3 Dayanim. And today, because today many of us live as a part of Western society, and a lot of our dealings, a lot of our give and take in whether in the business world or whether just in general culture is imbued, is influenced by secular culture. So a significant part of that culture is also a secular legal culture, a legal culture that we're really a part of. That's what we hear about in the news. This is how our neighbors go to court. This is how the businesses that we conduct resolve disputes. Of course, when there are non-Jews involved, who generally won't go to Beis, but would rather go to a court. And the fact that this is the culture that we live in also raises significant challenges to the Beis setting. I know about this from my own experience as a Dayan in Yerushalayim Basin for a number of years, also somebody who's represented both in Basin and sometimes in the courts, and this raises a lot of questions. For example, Al-Pi Din, the Shulchan Aruch tells us in Chosh Mishpat 7 Yud, there's no chiyuv for Beis Din to give its reasons for the decision. Plenty at a chayav, plenty at a zakai, and that's it. But certainly the culture, the legal culture that we're used to, that people come and come to and they're prepared to come to a Beis Din, they'll often feel that there's something unjust or there's something which is unfair if the Dayanim don't give the reasons. So should Batei Din today adopt this general practice of giving reasons or not? Another question is appeal. In the general court system, of course, we're used to the right of appeal. The right of appeal comes from a basic kind of standard of fairness that you never know if you've been if perhaps the specific justices that heard the case maybe made a mistake, maybe they got up on the wrong side of bed, maybe they had a bad mood, or they didn't like you, or they just got it wrong legally, and you never know. And that's why there's this kind of right of appeal that makes sure that if you really think you've been hard done by and this is a wrong and bad decision, then you have a right to take it to the next level of the court and to appeal the decision. Of course, in Beis Din there's no such thing. Of course, there's a certain hierarchy within Batei Din, a local Beis Din and a central Beis Din. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Pei and Beis, speaks about a certain hierarchy of Batei Din, but there's still no formal appeals court. There's no way that you can appeal. There's no official appeal. In some cases where there's a grievous, a really serious mistake, then the ruling can be revoked, and sometimes Beis Din could even be chayav to compensate for mistakes in Chosh Mishpat Siman Chof Hei. But generally, Beis Din acha Beis Din loy daika. One Beis Din doesn't check after another Beis Din. So you go to a regular Beis Din, and whatever they say is final, and there's no right of appeal. So again, because of the culture, the legal culture that we're influenced by, that we really live as a part of, the question is, should Batei Din or can Batei Din adopt an appeal system in the Batei Din of Eretz Yisrael, which are a part of the state-sanctioned courts. One of the state-sanctioned courts is a rabbinical court that deals mainly with issues of personal status of marriage and divorce. So then there is an appeal system. This was a huge controversy when the state of Israel was established, or even before then actually. Mishpatei Uziel has a famous tshuva about it in Chosh Mishpat, but the question is would it be correct for Batei Din today to adopt appeal system? What about Turnim appearing in Beis Din? Of course, in the legal system that we're a part of culturally, going to court without an attorney is unheard of. Of course, you bring an attorney. In terms of halacha, so Chosh Mishpat Siman Yud Gimel, you're supposed to hear the Balei Din themselves. You're supposed to hear litigants themselves. Should Batei Din allow Turnim? Should they encourage Turnim? How should this be regarded? So these are just a few of the questions, and of course there are many, many more questions, both in terms of procedure and in terms of the substance that Batei didn't have to deal with today, which is sometimes very complex legal substance, such as corporation law. Think about medical malpractice. These kind of things that were not, we don't have classical texts on such issues, and of course they raise a lot of questions for Batei Din. And today we're going to try to discuss these challenges, these issues, and the way that the Batei Din today try to navigate them, try to be effective as possible, and also try to be as attractive as possible. Because as we know, even though, like we mentioned before, going to court is a severe transgression, is a severe issue which is agreed upon by all poskim. We also know even in Eretz Yisrael where the archives are generally presided over by Jewish judges, Jewish justices. Still, the agreement of all poskim and all Dayanim from Chazon Ish and before and after is that there's still no heter to go to archives unless you have a heter from Beis Din to go. But in spite of that issur, still we know that many people do go to secular courts, either because they feel that they won't get proper justice from the Batei Din, because they think the Batei Din are too hamish and too part of the community, and then other harass heter, which certainly there's no legitimizing such harass heter. But on the other hand, there's also certainly a duty on the part of the Batei Din to be as professional as possible, to have as good an image as possible, so that people will feel comfortable going to Beis Din. So that's what we're going to be discussing, how Beis Din handle these challenges, and how do they make sure that they're doing as good a job, the best job that they can possibly do, in order that people should feel comfortable to come and litigate their disputes, their discussions, their quarrels that we all have sometimes, and if we don't, then friends of ours do, in the proper Beis Din setting.
So we're privileged to have with us today Harav Tzvi Gartner. Rav Gartner is an Av Beis Din on Beis Din Darchei Torah, which is under the leadership of Hagoin Rabbi Bais Shlita here in Yerushalayim. Rav Gartner is also the author of probably the definitive sefer still in the market today on Kfir Beget, on Kfir in Gittin, which is of course a huge issue both in the United States and in Eretz Yisrael. Also one of the founding members of Beis Din Vaad Hadin in New City, operating today, and also founding editor-in-chief of Tzvi, which is a journal, a Torah journal. So thank you, Rav Tzvi, for being with us today. And if I can open with a question, which it's a question which I think disturbs or is a kind of call for caution for people who want to go to Beis Din, but often are involved in modern questions of corporations, stocks, shares, and modern contracts which are full of legal intricacies, and they're concerned about whether Beis Din, who don't necessarily have the kind of legal training that judges have on courts, whether they have the kind of tools to be able to deal in an efficient and in a piercing way with these kind of questions. How would you respond to the person who's really, he wants to be Mekayim Din Torah, he wants to go to Beis Din, but he has this kind of lingering concern about the qualification of the Dayanim to deal with these kind of issues?
Well, obviously it's a very good question. Yes, it's definitely a concern. The truth is, when I first began dealing with Choshen Mishpat and Dayanim 30 plus years ago, there were a lot of Dayanim that indeed had difficulty in accessing the pertinent information and then integrating it into the halachic dialectic. Over the years, there's been significant improvements on this count. But of course, there's always room for improvement. Today's Dayanim are very cognizant of this issue. They know how to interact with professionals who assist them in accessing and internalizing the information they need. It also helps that today there are many Orthodox Torah knowledgeable professionals. So really, the Dayan and the professional are speaking the same language, at least to some extent.
So you would consult with in cases you consult with these professionals and
Absolutely. We do that all the time in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Weiss, our Bais, and he has an entire list of professionals who come to his shurim, and he makes use of their knowledge.
Right, and if you get different, obviously there's sometimes differences of opinion, so you're going to have to kind of make the decision of which opinion you go with. But you do that based on
of course,
your assessment of.
Yeah, of course. The next step is once he gathers information, the next step is the Dayan has to internalize information and determine how it fits into the halachic dialogue. Mm-hmm. Of course, that's something that he alone can do, and the professional can't really help him on that. But definitely the first step is interacting with the professionals. Sometimes you have a problem that you have a Dayan who thinks that since he's a Dayan, he's a lawyer also, and that's a big problem. But most Dayanim nowadays are aware of this problem, of this issue, and they know how to interact properly with professionals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in general, your assessment in Batei in general is that they've got this worked out. Meaning, do you advise people to bring attorneys into the Beis Din setting in order to clarify the situation, or you leave it to have the attorneys kind of fight it out, or do you leave it to the Beis Din to actually investigate and to figure it out?
Okay, well, it's a little bit complicated. Obviously, we always encourage people that the litigants that any information, any professionals they want to present to Beis Din, they're welcome to do so. We welcome it. The reason being is because we want people to feel comfortable that they've had their day in court. On the other hand, a professional, the opinion that was presented by one side is a little bit suspect. So what we usually do is that even after we've got all the information from each side and all the expert opinions from each side, we'll get our own expert opinion, which of course we will share with the parties and give them opportunity to comment, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in general, on the question of, I know this is a big halachic question, of course, about Dayanim appearing in courts. You're in favor of Dayanim, against Dayanim. What's your personal experience with the question of having Dayanim in court in the Beis Din?
It's hard to say. Meaning, for instance, in the Beis Din Vaad which I'm involved in New City, and also in the RCA Beis Din in Manhattan, there's a rule that they don't allow Dayanim. In the Vaad the reason why they made that rule was at the prompting of many Gedolei Rosh Yeshivas in America. The reason being is that very often Dayanim hinder more than they help. But I don't feel that you can make that you can always say that. For instance, by in Darchei Torah, our opinion is that you can't make any rules. Sometimes, indeed, a Dayan things would have been just better if you wouldn't be there to begin with. Other times, we feel that the Dayan has really saved the day. Without him, we couldn't even get to the bottom of the matter. Mm-hmm. So again, it's hard to say. It's hard to make a call. On the one hand, you can definitely understand the frustration of the Rosh Yeshivas and other people who've been burnt, who themselves have been burnt, or have seen other people burnt by Dayanim. That's why they go to the extreme that just do away with it totally. But
burned by Dayanim because the Dayanim themselves can be corrupt, or they can be too aggressive, or What's the main? I mean, again, in the court system, everyone brings an attorney. There's no such thing, almost going to court without an attorney. How is it so fundamentally different in the Beis Din setting?
I imagine it's a good question. I don't really have a good answer. Part of the answer could be that is because of in the court system is more rigid, and plus lawyers themselves are subject to review by their. But whereas Dayanim,
right, the bar association, whatever. Dayanim is more like a free for all kind of, right?
Yeah. But again, I really do feel that it's unfair to make a blanket statement that all Dayanim are no good. There are plenty of Dayanim who do a great job, and they actually help move the Torah forward in a positive fashion.
Right. So, Gartner, let me ask you something. I know that, from having been somewhat involved and certainly hearing about many cases for many years about, the big kind of borerus cases that you've been party to, and often the impression is that often in the end, when it's like a really big case and when it's a complicated case, somehow it ends up in court anyway, and then people go twice. They go first to the borerus and then they have to struggle in court too. What's behind this phenomenon of kind of, that based in it, it's difficult, at least in a borerus situation, to kind of end it at the end of the borerus, and what kind of steps can be made to avoid this? People think they're going to the borerus, and here they're going to sort it out in a kind of a more amicable way, without having to go through the strains and the pressures of the court environment, and then in the end they get schlepped into court anyway.
Yeah. Okay, listen, it's definitely a problem. What's behind the phenomenon? Two things. First of all, the very makeup of borerus and zabla, where each side is represented, so to speak, by a member of the panel, can be conducive to aberration, or at least deviation from straight and narrow halachic path. And B,
meaning what? The actual, you find this in Zabla that each side is taking a side, meaning it's not neutral.
Right. It's not supposed to be like that. According to the real definition of borerus, the borerus is supposed to tread a very thin line between representing and being it then, right? Yeah, not so much representing. It's putting forward the arguments in favor of it, but not losing his judicial partiality. It's a problem that's existed for the past 400 to 500 years already. Okay, it is a problem. Another problem is sad to say that the deterrence factor against going to court is steadily declining, mainly because of the plethora of high-profile cases of borerus that, it's sad to say, end up in courts. Years ago, it was practically unheard of. Today, the situation is closer to Kol Gadol Mechaver Ros Yisem Maher the Beis Mishpat.
Beis Mishpat, right, to the court.
Yeah. How can it be avoided? Good question. Maybe we'll discuss more about that later on.
Meaning that there's a kind of a zilusa de Beidina kind of, a zilusa de Beis Mishpat, that people are less, it's become more kind of socially accepted, as it were, to go to court, even though, the Chumrah, based on Shulchan Aruch, based on Gemara, it's like, super chama thing, and still people allow themselves to go to court.
Unfortunately, that's the case. Yeah, we see it very.
Right, and so I mean, if we see people are willing to go to court, then perhaps it's a reflection of certain problems that at least people perceive in the Beis Din system. What would you say, if I ask you like an open-ended question, what would you say is there to really be to be improved, to be fixed up in the Beis Din system, in order that people should feel really confident and be happy, to accept the Beis Din, to go to Beis Din, to accept the Psak? What can be done to strengthen the Batei Din?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's a little bit difficult for me to comment on the situation in America because I'm active mainly in Israel.
Okay.
But in general, I would say most Batei Din are professional, competent, dedicated, and ethical. How can we improve things? Of course, there's always room for improvement, no doubt about that. First off, I would quote something that Chaim Gedalia Simbalit Shlita from the Beis in Eretz Yisrael.
Right. So he was on the Panovich. He was on the Panovich case, which was
he was on the Panovich case.
One of the biggest controversies over here.
Yes, absolutely. So he once wrote. Actually, he once told me and dictated to me the following line. The first thing is you have to have competent Dayanim who know the halachas, who know how to get to the bottom and the heart of the matter.
Mm-hmm. But and who also don't know how to handle human relationships. I mean, Dayanim need to know the halacha. They also need to be able to. I think that the Goyin, right? The Goyin, I think, says somewhere that a Dayan needs to have both of these skills, both a halachic skill and a human skill. Sometimes you see Dayanim who are big Talmidei Chacham, but they don't know how to run the panel.
Absolutely, yeah, okay,
Right.
but as I said, that second part is the.
You're saying the second part we find more competence than the first part.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but even in the second part, there's two parts to it. There's interpreting what are the main points of the case and getting to the bottom of it. So that is indeed a very difficult thing to do. I once commented to a number of notes telling this one that's the main part of the Din Torah. Getting the facts straight. Afterwards, seeing which place and which shach it fits into. That's the easy part, and he just smiled.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's second of all. There's a call. Ein l'dayin ela ma'ashein of royes. The dayan has to believe in himself. He has to have confidence in what his eyes see. He has to remember too that Elokim nitzal b'das kel. Kadosh Baruch was there with him. Chazal tell us that Hafir Ruach HaKadosh b'beis din or b'beis medrash. The Chassam Pfeffer explains that Ruach Hashem ha'oskei Torah lishma asher zochim l'chavin ha'emet afilim l'fei teva chachmosam v'sichlam lo yasigu yadayim toshia kazu. V'kom HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chas v'yoy v'chachmos ha'chakim ha'lefi shah.
Even though we find some Dayanim who say, no, I want to consult with another Dayan, or I want to consult with. You're saying the Dayan should have confidence in his own. He's sitting on the Beis Din. He has to make his mind up or make his decision.
Absolutely, but of course it's always good to consult with other people, or the Rabbi Yankiv Lipshitz in his biography, Rabbi Yisrael Chanan. We know that Rabbi Yisrael Chanan was the biggest mechadish in the world. But Afal Pikin, Rabbi Yankiv Lipshitz writes that before Rabbi Yisrael Chanan would write a tshuva, he would go through all the makoiris on this halacha, including all the previous tshuvas, and then he would roll up his sleeves and get to work. So yes, definitely the Dayan has to have confidence in his decision. But it's not only there's nothing wrong, but it's even commendable for him to do his due diligence and consult with his colleagues. There's nothing wrong with that. It's very good.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the Dayan has to ultimately he has to realize the buck stops by him, and he has to do what he has to do. It's interesting. About 15 years ago, Ramento Shafran repeated to me a conversation that he had with a very prominent Rav and Dayan. This Rav and Dayan was complaining about the rogue Rabbonim who engage in Kfiyah Shelo Kedin. Nowadays he would be complaining about other things, about Kedushin, etc., whatever.
I've got the same idea, right? We know about these rogue Dayan. Okay.
Right. So Ramental told him, listen, you're right, but instead of expending your energy about these Rabbonim, you should ask yourself a different question. Why are the ladies going to these Rabbonim in the first place? The answer is if the legitimate body didn't would do what they're supposed to do, if they would pass in Tzvi and Tzvi and Ksuba when the lover wants it, then the ladies wouldn't have to look elsewhere. On the other hand, true, ain't a dayan of mashen of royas, but as Rabbi Yisrael points out, that's assuming that they have eyes. And as Rabbi Yisrael explains, the dayan has to be absolutely sure that he has no hidden or sublime agendas that are distorting his vision. So again, it's a gesher tzar ma'od. On the one hand, you have to have confidence in yourself. On the other hand, you have to keep on checking yourself.
Right. For somebody so active both in Eretz Yisrael and in the United States, how would you say the Batei Din compare? I mean, certainly in areas of Gittin, I imagine there's a huge nafkamina, because in Eretz Yisrael, you can get put in prison and have other means of enforcing the get that in the States or outside of Eretz Yisrael you just don't have. So I'm sure that's a game changer, in a big sense. In other than that, are there significant differences, or it's really a similar kind of system in terms of the Batei Din?
It's hard for me to say. I'm mainly active in Eretz Yisrael. I don't really know what goes on so much in America. My involvement in the new Bais in a new city is very recent thing, the past year or so. So I haven't had that much experience about what goes on in America. In general, I would say that there are good people in both places. more than that I can't say. It's exactly fine. Yeah.
I'm sure you don't want to get in.
There are good people in both places, and I'm sure each place has its own problems and areas for improvement.
Right. Let me just mention one other issue which I just had this last week. Somebody came to me that he was being Tuvya. He was being Tuvya some contractor on a real estate deal, and he was Tuvya him to a Beis Din, and the contractor said, "Well, I'm the Nitva, and I want to schlep you to a Beis Din in some Beis Din in Bnei Brak," and it turns out that this Beis Din is a very specific Beis Din associated with a very specific kind of a group or sect, and the Beis Din where he was Tuvya said, well, there's nothing else that we can do. How do we deal with this? Or is there a way of dealing with this kind of? It's a halacha of Honigwachs or a nitva, but the halacha was given in a very different circumstance where you have a central authority in each city, and then the question is, where does the nitva live? Today, it's like you have these, many Batei din, and the nitva gets to choose where he wants to go. And then often the Tuvya will kind of lose confidence in the process because he doesn't trust the nitva's choice. Is there a way of, first of all, how have you handled this in the past, and is there a way of getting, making this more efficient or trying to fix this up?
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, what you mentioned about the sectarial Beis Din in Bnei Brak, that doesn't necessarily disqualify it. If they're competent, they're competent. But okay, but definitely the problem is a problem. But I'm not so sure that the problem is because of the halacha or nitva. For instance, halacha or nitva is really only a later takana in the times of the Yerushalayim. According to the din of the Gemara, it's the Tuvya can decide where to go. But you just like the nitva abuses the system, can abuse the system now. If you go back to the original, then the Tuvya might be able to abuse the system. Listen, no system is perfect, but they do try to keep a handle on it, and that they say true halacha nitva, but if a nitva comes and gives something totally off the wall, they don't allow it.
Right.
Another point is that this is really more nogea to America than Eretz Yisrael. Because in America, the most of the Dinei Torahs are Dinei Torahs that are involved that have to do with partnerships, business deals, sales, purchase, etc. Usually, all these things started off with a contract. So if there would be a clause in the contract that if we have any issues, we're going to take it to such and such a Beis Din, so then you would solve a lot of grief and a lot of time and effort and cost. Right.
As long as both sides read the contract carefully. I know of cases where somebody just didn't read that line, and then suddenly he was taken to some Beis Din, and there's no way out. It's a clause. So one has to read.
That he has no one to blame but himself.
Or his lawyer, right?
If he's signing the contract, he should read what he's saying. More than that, the halacha is that if a person signs the contract and he doesn't read it, that means that he's basically saying, I'm accepting it lock, stock, and barrel without knowing what it says.
Right. So people should read their contract. Maybe just to finish, one more question. I know that Darchei Torah is considered a special kind of Beis Din in terms of its procedure. It has a very upright and very transparent, I guess, procedure, which is it gives it a kind of a respect that other Batei Din, or not all other Batei Din, of course, but some Batei Din, you see, because there are no rigid and fixed procedural principles that Batei Din need to run by. So often litigants will feel that everything is very flexible. They don't know what's going to happen next. They don't know. Should we have fixed klalim, fixed principles and rules full procedure. Is there a way of making going to Beis Din? You know, it wouldn't be the case that each Beis Din is like a completely different world, but there'll be something more standardized. Or do you think this is a problem, or each Beis Din should just do whatever it wants and
It's definitely an issue. Whether you could get all the Batei Dinim together to make a uniform set of rules, I'm very skeptical about that. You know what it is to get two Jews together. But definitely each Beis Din themselves should have rules and regulations. For instance, in the Vaad that I'm involved in, you go online, you'll see a very lengthy document of all the rules and regulations that are going to govern the Beis Din. I think that's very important, and it's very and the more transparency you have, and the more
professionalism. I mean, people expect right.
Yeah, no, not just the more how would you say hashkacha? The more
more oversight.
Oversight you have, of course that's better. You know.
Right, and if you'll allow me just one final question, which is also something that people often bring up, and that's a question of giving reasons. You know, some Batei Din just give a psak, you know, like the Gemara on the Shulchan Aruch says, you know, ploni chayev kach v'kach and ploni zakei, and that's it. And you know, because there's no appeal system, so there's no formal need to give reasons, but often litigants are you know left kind of in the dark, and they're interested to know the reasons. But on the other hand, if you give the reasons, you also allow you allow the litigants to start arguing with you. But what do you think is the best approach towards giving reasons in the Piskei Din?
So first of all, you mentioned about appeal. By us in Darchei Torah, we do have a process for appeal. We allow people to appeal our Piskei Dinim with the certain guidelines of how and when. But definitely there is a mechanism for appeal. Also in the Vaad we have a mechanism for appeal, appeal and review. As to the question of the
meaning, and this is written into the regulations or the code of conduct of the Beis Din, that there is a kind of formal appeal procedure.
Yes, and Darchei Torah is written into the Shtar Birurin, because we don't have separate rules and regulations. And in Vaad it's definitely written into the rules and regulations. It could be even written into the Shtar Birurin also. I'm not 100% sure. Okay. As to the question of Nimukim, most Batei Dinim, the most respectable Batei Dinim, they do give a certain amount of basic nimukim, so that the Batei Dinim can see where the Beis Din is coming from. But on the other hand, you're not going to see that a Beis Din, generally a Beis Din is not going to write a long tshuva and with all their populim and everything, because first of all, it will in many cases it will just go over the head of the Batei Dinim anyway, and or even worse, you know, they'll pick up on this and that, and they'll start nitpicking on this and that. But basic explanations, the most reputable Batei Dinim do give basic explanation of what they've done and where they're coming from.
Good. Anything that you'd like to add on the question of Batei Din, the question of you know, in your years of experience, how are things moving? Are we going in the right direction? Are we going in the wrong direction?
Listen, we're definitely going in the right direction. You know, things. The more people that are involved in it, so then the more professional it gets, and definitely going in the right direction. But to say that we've gotten there already, no, we still have what to improve. But that's not just in Batei Dinim, that's in everything in life. There's always room to improve.
Fair enough. All right, good place to leave it. Rav Tzvi Gartner, thank you very, very much for being with us, and matzlacha going forward.
Thank you for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you very much, Call.
Yeah, bye-bye.
With us today on the show is Harav Shmuel Binyomin Honigwachs, a Dayan on the Beis Havaad based in Lakewood, which also provides a kind of national service across the United States of giving din Torah, of a Beis Din forum for disputes across the United States, a number of branches. Rabbi Honigwachs, thank you very much for being with us today. And if I can start with a general question about Beis Din procedure and Beis Din practices, because I think perhaps one of the challenges today is that many of the litigants who are going to be coming to Beis Din are influenced by the kind of general culture which is out there in the Western world in general, the general kind of legal culture, which has a number of assumptions. For example, that Piskei Din, that decisions have reasons, and that generally there's a right of appeal. And even in terms of some of the basic content, people's kind of expectations, both in terms of the procedure and even in terms of some of the content, for example, Dinin Izakin, that Apid in Torah, that grammar is part of, which is strange for I imagine, for many litigants coming in from the general assumptions of Western culture. And the question is, how in Beis Din do we deal with that? Should we adopt part of that kind of general legal culture into the Beis Din system, or should we say we have our own system? It's an authentic system. It's the way that Din Torah is, and whoever wants to come to Beis Din to receive Din Torah, which is what you have to do al pi halacha, so that's what you get, and even if it's vastly different from what's going on outside, so that's how it has to be. How do you approach that in the Beis Din setting?
So yeah, thank you for having me on. These are all very, very good questions. They're questions which bother me a lot. All the points you made are true. I mean, on the one hand, it's hard for people to accept the way things are done in Beis Din because of the reasons that you mentioned and other reasons. On the other hand, you're right. This is the Messiah where the Beis Din tries as much as possible to follow the Torah, to follow the way that the Rabbi Yerushalayim teaches us to, first of all, how we conduct ourselves, and second of all, like what framework we use to paskin and to decide and arbitrate the cases. So on the one hand, we're trying to do what the Torah tells us to do. On the other hand, you're right that it makes people frequently very unhappy with the Beis Din process. Mm-hmm. That being said, I'd like to address the issues that you brought up individually and also in a more general sense. So, okay. Individually, let's start with the first point that you asked about. You asked about the fact that Beis Din doesn't provide the reasons for the psak din. Now, in my experience, I know different Batei Din do things slightly differently. Our general policy is that if a person asks for the reasons for the psak din, we sometimes give it to him on the spot. Generally speaking, our answer will be that we'll be willing to give you the reasons as soon as you finish paying whatever money Beis Din was mechayev you to pay. Now, in our experience... And
that's because you've had that experience, meaning once you give the reasons, people start hackling and they say you got it wrong and then they're not willing to pay, that these things happen?
Right. So you're bringing out an important point. I mean, when you're talking about court, so court has... they're vested with authority, which is... they're backed by the authority of the government, and because of that, the court doesn't have to be concerned that their ruling won't be carried out. Whereas in Beis Din obviously does, and certainly in the United States, Beis Din does not have any authority mitzad the government. We do have authority as far as the arbitration agreement is concerned. Once somebody signs arbitration agreement, that can be enforced by court, but that's not always the venue that people want to use to enforce the psak din. It's certainly better for the litigants if the psak will be carried out without forcing the litigants to, after they've gone through the entire Beis Din process, to then take their dispute to court and try to get payment in that way.
But it's fairly, isn't it? Is it a complicated process to get the psak din, to get it approved by the courts? That's complicated.
It costs money though, and it's money and time.
Costs money.
It's a lot more satisfying to the litigants if the Bezdin is the end of the process, and they can say once we got our psak in, we're going to get our money. Whereas if Bezdin gives out the reason, that can frequently be used to try to sort of dilute the power of the psak din by showing that to Rabbanim, who will then back their congregant, for example, and say, no, this psak doesn't make sense to me. So as a vehicle for making sure the psak gets carried out as quickly and as easily as possible, Bezdin will say, look, we'll wait until you fulfill the psak din, and then we'll give you a reason. Then you can look it over and argue with us. And in our experience, once the psak din has been carried out, the litigants very rarely are interested in the reasons for the psak. From our experience, even there were times when people did want the reasons, and it was fine. We didn't have any negative feedback. That being said, there are Batei Din that won't necessarily do that, and they also have a very good point, because like I was mentioning before, a lot of the power that the Bezdin has, we don't have that much power, but a lot of our power that we can use to help people arbitrate their disputes without having to go through the court system is the fact that there's some respect for Batei Din, and there are Batei Din that are concerned that if they give out the reasons and people look at the reasons and they don't like it, that will somehow diminish the respect of the Bezdin and prevent us from helping people as much as we're able to.
Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe the Tuvya, though, is that the reasons have to be more convincing. You're saying that that's difficult, meaning, you can have many different opinions and because there is a halacha mehechan dantani, if it's a complicated case, and so there could be a chiyuv to give the reasons. Well, in such cases,
the position of the Batei Din is that halachically we're not obligated to give the reasons. You're right. There are situations where Bezdin will be obligated to give the reasons, but generally speaking, in a normal situation where there's no reason to be concerned about the process, Bezdin is not obligated to give the reasons, and Bezdin feel there are Batei Din that feel that since it may diminish the respect of the Bezdin, it's better not to give the reasons. Like I was saying before, somebody can take it to a Rav, his Rav that he supports, and the Rav has a reason to find fault in the psak of the Bezdin because of the fact that his congregant got wronged, so to speak, by the Bezdin. So it gives the Rav an incentive to try to destroy the psak din, and that's a position that some Batei Din feel it's not beneficial to have that thing happen.
Right, I understand. I mean, this gets into the other point that I mentioned about the right of appeal. I mean, the reason why courts have to give all of the reasons is because there's a right of appeal. And of course, in Basin, there's no right of appeal. But even though there's no right of appeal, perhaps we could have a kind of internal appeal that they could go back to your Basin itself and say, listen, you gave a psak based on X, Y, Z, and these are the reasons you've given, and we have, we want a taina on those reasons, we spoke to a Rav or we spoke to whoever it is, and we have these tainas. Would you accept such a kind of appeal, informal appeal, or you say, no, once we've given the psak, that's it, al pi halacha, it's finished?
So certainly, yeah, I mean, look, if somebody can show based on the reasons that we give that we were wrong, 100%, we would have to back out. No question about it. There was somebody that called up after the psak was given, and he tells us that I spoke to G'dolei Ador, and they said that the psak is terrible. I told him, Gevaldik. Have one of the G'dolei Ador call us, and we'll be happy to discuss it with him and back down. He refused to do it. So, it's very easy to talk about it, but when it comes l'maisa, when we actually offer that to people, go ahead, have somebody calls up, we'll discuss it with them. If we're wrong, we'll back down. It doesn't happen that much,
Mm-hmm. Right, but there's nothing formal, though. Meaning, there's no, I know that there are, but some Batei Din, it's like a rare thing, but there are some Batei Din that, in order to give people this kind of more confidence in the psak, they say, you know what, we're going to institute like a formal appeal that you can hear this, that the case can be heard by another panel or something. You don't have anything like that. Meaning it's
right. It's not right. It's not set up formally. It certainly is a good idea. It's a good thing to do. But again, in my mind, that I hear what you're saying. It is possible technically to set that up as not an official appeals process, but like sort of an arbitrary appeals process the Bezdin accepts upon themselves.
Right.
But, it really strikes to the root of of the real issue with the Bezdin system nowadays, where Bezdin does not have any authority vested in it, by the government, and even as far as the community is concerned, we don't have such a structured community. We don't have such an organized community where the community can impose that kind of appeal on the Bezdin, which would be, in my mind, a very big advantage if the community can be structured in such a way that the community would oversee the Bezdin. You would have like a panel of Rabbanim that would oversee Batei Din. I think that would be an amazing thing, but I don't think that, unfortunately, our community is not cohesive enough and doesn't have enough structure to be able to support that kind of thing.
I mean, some communities also have several Batei Din, and then of course, each one is kind of in competition with the other, which makes things even more difficult, both in terms of oversight and in terms of having a central authority. Meaning, once upon a time, the whole idea of Beis Din was like a central authority over the city or over the community. And now that central authority is maybe in some places it exists, but I think in the United States it's probably difficult to find such an authority.
Right, yeah, that's a very big downside. Baruch Hashem, here in Lakewood, we have two Batei Din. We have the Bezdin Mesharim and the Beis Havaad. Baruch Hashem, we get along very, very well, and I'll frequently go and approach Dayanim on the other Bezdin to ask them if I have a hard din Torah. I'll go and ask them, what would you do in such a case? I try to get as much feedback and input as possible, just to know that I'm like covering all the bases and I have as much information as possible.
Right. The third thing that I mentioned before is, aside from the procedural aspects of the din Torah, there's also the kind of the substantive aspects. I just gave grammar as an example, but there would be other examples. For instance, a lot of contract law. Sometimes in Beis Din, we would be able to kind of throw out contractual agreements because of asmachta or because of kinyan dvarim or because of all kinds of things like that. That, like in regular courts of law, you would raise eyebrows and say, this is like what the whole of the modern kind of a legal system is based on contracts and based on things that halacha doesn't always recognize. And of course, nizakin, a lot of nizakin is or might be grammar, or different aspects of the Torah that would patter. How do you get around issues like that?
Yeah, so that's another very, very important point. So there is a famous Drashas Haran that says that.
Right, Drush Yud Aleph, where he speaks about the din, the supplementary halacha. You can the din of the melech, right?
Right. So the Ran says that the Dinei Torah really alone are not enough to necessarily create a functioning society. Sometimes frequently society will have to make its own rules to govern itself. Now, again, that brings us back to the point that I was bringing up before, that if society would be able to organize itself in a way, Bezdin can be a great benefit to society, despite the fact that people frequently say that Bezdin is not as good as we could be, which is we know that we're not as on the level that we could be necessarily, but it's a benefit for society to have a strong functioning Bezdin. It would be an amazing benefit for everybody, to avoid machloikis, to settle marital disputes and financial disputes, but a lot of machloikis can be settled if there will be a strong Bezdin, and that can only be created if you have a organized community that can give power to Bezdin, and an organized community, again, which can create these kind of changes, so to speak, to add on like new things that are necessary according to the changing financial environment. So
changing circumstances, sure, right.
Right. So let's say we say, okay, it doesn't really work anymore that grama should be potter. Okay, so we can talk about grama's chayv l'asdei shamayim, but there certainly are many, many cases where we can say that we might need more. We might need takonos of bnei ha'ir to be able to really settle things better better than what we've been doing till now, and that is only possible by people getting together and saying we need this. If people get together and say we need a change, we need to accept a certain type of norms that are necessary for us, then that can be done. But Beis Din can't unilaterally do that because we don't have the power.
I mean, you could theoretically, you could write in the Stadt Beirut, just like most arbitration documents of Batei Din include a clause that you can do pshara, and you can, you have kind of a broad, strong discretion of doing all kind of things. You can also write, we have also the discretion to be mechayev in grammar. Theoretically,
right.
I think.
Well, that is included in the idea of pshara. If we see that somebody is 100% wrong, the other person is 100% right, but the person who's wrong won't end up having to pay because he's potter because of grammar. So Beis Din can say, you know what, we're going to disregard that now because you accepted pshara, and we're going to
and you would do that. You would do that sometimes in a Beis Din setting. Let's say it's a contract, and really he could get out of it through some asmachta mechanism, but you would say, listen, this was the understanding between the both parties, and even though you could maybe wind your way out of it, but we're going to pass on that you're chayev, like the Beis Din would do such a thing.
I don't know. So far, we haven't had a situation where the bad guy ends up winning just because he had some kind of legal loophole. It's usually more nuanced than that. If we see that Reuven is the guilty person and Shimon is innocent, then there's usually something in the Torah that's being mechayev the guilty person. That's what I found in all my experience in Beis Din.
Meaning you generally have the tools, even given the kind of limitations of the Torah law, but you generally have the tools to make sure that the kind of din tzedek, that the proper justice comes out in spite of the takanas that we could make, and right now it's hard to make. Again, it's hard to make also because that you need a lot of trust from people, and because there are different rabbanim and different opinions, and it's very hard to get people to agree to make any kind of takana.
That's true.
But,
100%, yeah.
Right. But what about the din of? I mean, there's a specific halacha which I find is sometimes very difficult to deal with of Honigwachs nitva, meaning that somebody has a Tuvya and he wants to take somebody to a regular neutral Beis Din, and then the nitva says, well, Honigwachs nitva, I want you to come with me to I don't know where, right, to some Beis Din, to some joint, and it might be a very different, each Beis Din has its own procedure, its own attitudes, its attitude towards Din Adam al-Chusa, for example, and towards, and then often the nitva has this, kind of unfair advantage that he gets to choose the forum, and he can choose the forum based on kind of already assumed knowledge of which Batei Din paskin kind of which way on different shilas. How do we get around this issue?
Well, usually when you have that kind of situation where the nitva is telling the Tuvya, I refuse to go to your Beis Din, I want to go to one specific Beis Din, usually that would end up in Beirut, which is its own can of worms. But
well, meaning they would do like a zabla, they would do zabla,
right?
Why? Because when both, right, meaning either zabla or end up in court. I don't know why, right. But I find often that it ends up in both. You start with zabla and you end up in court.
We've also had, unfortunately, we've had a very serious problem where you have like these Batei Din that are like some fellow comes along, not necessarily knowledgeable person, not necessarily a good ethical person, and he'll open up a Beis Din, and then whenever anybody tries to get somebody to come to a respectable Beis Din, the other person will say, no, I want to go to that lowlife, and that again, that's bringing us back to the situation where people out of desperation will do things that ends up ruining everything for everybody else, because if you'll have one person who, because he's in a financial situation that he feels he can't get out of, he'll go ahead and use and promote somebody who's destroying the system, so that ruins the system for everybody else, and then nobody can have respect or be able to use the Beis Din system in the way it was intended to use because of what you're saying, because every nitva will say, I want to go to that Beis Din which is not respectable, and they'll be able to
Right, to undermine it, basically undermining the whole system. But then the other Batei Din could say, we don't accept that, meaning we don't accept that as a Hodach Achar Nitzvah, and you either have to stay with us or we'll write a Ksav Siruv against you and we'll give Rishus to go to court. Isn't that a possible solution?
Right, it is. But again, like Ksav Siruv is only as powerful as
the community,
as the community gives
right.
it, right? If the community is not going to respect it, so if you'll have people walking around saying, no, this Ksav Siruv is no good because I like that guy, right? Then it's going to ruin the whole thing.
Right. Just another question which I found that sometimes people have difficulty in the Beis Din system is when it comes to often in modern kind of interactions, then rather than individuals, it's often interactions between corporate bodies, a corporation, a limited company, and so on. And then the question is, these whole corporations, they're kind of formed, their whole existence depends on there being a legal entity which is formed under secular law, under the law of the land. And then l'chayra, like all of the dealings, all of the legal dealings, the legal handling of disputes and issues within these companies should be done according to the kind of the law book, right? The corporation law that form the companies. How do Batei Din address such issues without, of course, unless perhaps they consult with? Do they need to consult with attorneys? Do they themselves need to be experts in corporate law? How do you deal with issues that come up that involve these kind of complicated legal entities?
100%. The Beis Din will frequently ask the opinion of lawyers. My father was a professor of law for many years, and I constantly call him to interpret language and to explain to me how to treat different entities, like you say. And, Baruch Hashem, also nowadays, there's a lot of information available. We're able to access a lot of information and find out what the law would be and how the law would treat different kind of entities.
Meaning Beis Din have to, the Batei Din would need to really gain a certain degree of expertise, even in the secular law, in the law of the land, insofar as it's relevant for the Dinei Torah.
Right, 100%.
Right, and when you have issues, again, I don't know if this comes up every day in Beis Din, but issues like questions of medical negligence, questions of really like new questions, questions of that depend on modern technology and so on, intellectual property, these kind of issues. You would say the same thing would apply, meaning one just has to actually study the topic, but Beis Din is still, you would say Beis Din is still the right forum for all these issues. There's no.
Beis Din does take everything into account. We try to broaden the tools by which we pass in Dinei Torah to include anything which could be relevant. You have the Din Malchus, you have Minhagim, and all we try to find out as much as we can about all these things to be able to pass and write.
Right, meaning, let's say if it's a limited liability company, then you wouldn't be mechayev the person to pay money because it's a limited liability company, or you would say in halacha there's no such thing and you're chayev anyway.
No, certainly. If a person does business with a LLC, then as far as I understand, the psak is that al pi din he's not relying on the person on personal responsibility. However, obviously, legally also, LLCs could be, the judge could pierce the corporate veil.
The corporate veil in extreme circumstances, but that's like a very, nuanced and delicate question. When do you pierce the corporate veil? When don't you pierce the? You would go the same way though. You would actually, think about do we now pierce the corporate veil and make the guy pay, or wouldn't we? Meaning you would actually...
We would try to examine, it's obviously very hard because we are not the judge and we won't be able to... It's hard for us to get into the judge's mind and find out if in this case he would pierce the corporate veil. And it doesn't necessarily always depend on that either. It doesn't necessarily depend on whether a particular judge would pierce the corporate veil. Every judge rules according to his own personal
discretion,
attitude,
right? His own discretion and opinion, right?
His own discretion, right? So again, these are all nuanced issues where we have to take a lot of things into consideration. We're gonna consider how much the borrower misled the lender. If he misled him, and if Beis feels that it's correct and proper in this case to obligate him personally, then Beis might do that. It all depends on all the other circumstances of the case.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Any other comments that you would like to add about the Beis system, the comparison with the legal courts? Anything that you feel is important for our listeners to be aware of, to hear?
Listen, when I went into being a Dayan, it's a very it's a lot of idealism you come into with them. Baruch Hashem, from what I've seen from people and how people accept the Piskei Din, and the respect that people have for each other, and the how hard people will go and work not to fight with each other has been it's been a very humbling experience to me. I'm very impressed by the.
That's very nice to hear. You're saying that in general, you've seen a very positive response to the Piskei Din, a very positive attitude. People don't want to schlep on fights and disputes, and they want to get reiterated. That's very nice to hear.
We've had very good experiences in our business so far, as far as my limited knowledge is. But everybody has their own experiences. But Baruch Hashem, we've had.
Okay.
I'm very impressed. People really want to resolve their disputes. They don't want to fight. Even in business, people avoid saying mean things to the other person, even if they think that it might. In the heat of the moment, they will be tempted to do so. But people try to be.
All right. It sounds. Yemesha Mashiach Mamash. Rabbi Honigwachs, thank you very, very much for being with us, for the illuminating conversation, and Matatzlacha in the future. Yitzhak should stay with your experiences, should carry on this way. Kalzev, thank you. Kalzev.
So with us on the line today is Tuvya Stern. Tuvya Stern is an attorney in Eretz Yisrael, specializing mainly in family law, but not exclusively. He appears in Batei Din, whether the state Batei Din or private Batei Din, and also in courts of law across the board. Tuvya, thank you very much for being with us today, and also as a good friend, it's much appreciated, and I always enjoy conversation with you. And just to get started, as somebody who appears both in the court system and in the Batei Din system, I'm sure you've heard of this kind of common perception that people think that it's harder to get Din Torah, to get justice through the Batei Din, that the Batei Din have a certain difficulty or difficulties, whether because of community issues or because of the internal structure of Batei Din in paskening the Din Torah, the justice that the Tzadim are coming to receive. Can you identify with that, or can you tell us about your perception, your experience with that?
Okay, I'll start off with an observation that the main issue is a premise of the question, and I'll say that definitely many people feel express the feelings that you expressed in the question. I would say even maybe most of the people, most of my clients, have said things to some extent, expressing their concerns with whether they were going to get justice or they received justice, or whether they had the Dayan weren't listening to them, or weren't, paskening the din as they thought it was supposed to be. So I've heard that complaint many, many times. And I think there's, as I said, a fault in the question itself, in that there's an assumption that is what you are going to the Beis Din for. The assumption is that a person files a lawsuit or goes for Din Torah in order to get justice. Justice is an abstract ideal, but it is not something that a person who is find themselves in Beis Din or in court should be looking for, because they're not going to find it there. It's a ideal. It's nothing practical. A person goes to court. A person goes to Beis Din lahavdil for very particular reasons. someone owes them money, they have an issue in a matrimonial matter, there's an issue of custody. They're looking for a legal remedy. The Gemara says the person has a pain, they go to a doctor. Okay, you're looking for a solution, some kind of a practical result, and that's why you go to a Beis Din. If you are looking for people to hear you out, understand you, fix the world, create justice, you're going to be disappointed because you're not going to find it. And this is one of the introductions I give to my clients during an intake or at the beginning of a case, to lower their expectations and not start off with that faulty premise that the Beis Din is supposed to provide justice. Okay.
Well, let me come in on this just for a second. I mean, one I think a reasonable yardstick, a reasonable way to assess whether a person feels that he's gotten a proper ruling, whether you call it justice or you call it something else, is the way people come out of Beis Din. Somebody generally loses. One side loses, one side wins in Beis Din and in court. And if the ruling is a ruling which is founded on a psak which is reasonable and a psak that makes sense and it has a justice to it, then even the side that loses will at least sometimes come out and say, you know what, I got a fair hearing. The panel heard my arguments and they weighed them up, and I lost because the psak wasn't in my favor, because the din Torah was against me, or in court lahavdil because the law didn't go my way. But at least I know that there was something fair going on here, that I got my day in court or I got my day in Beis Din. If you compare people coming out of Beis Din and coming out of court, let's say the losing side, because the winning side, okay, they're happy either way. But let's say the losing side, would you say that's a fair comparison? Do people come out of Beis Din and come out of court in a similar way, saying, all right, we did our best and the law or the din Torah came out against us? Or do people have a greater grievance in Beis Din or in court? Is there something which is inherently more difficult for the Baalei Din to come out and feel that they've had a fair hearing, that justice has been done?
From my experience, I would say as follows. Regarding sort of after they receive the ruling, after the case is over, people have the same kinds of complaints both in the court and in the Beis Din. I work in Israel, where we have an official government Beis Din, which means this is not like in the U.S. or in England or other countries where the Batei Din in matrimonial matters are voluntary and you have to sign an arbitration agreement. In Israel, the Batei Din here have the authority, they have the power to rule. They have the ability to compel people to appear in front of them and to carry out their rulings. And I can say that overall, I would say that the same clients that are looking for justice are upset both in the Beis Din or in the court because they didn't find it. And the clients who are there to get results, the clients who are there to resolve issues as opposed to going for some kind of therapy or to look for people who understand them, those people are usually happy. They might be unhappy because they got a bad result, but they don't have that same amount of disappointment as those who are looking for justice. Now, you mentioned two separate issues which we have to make some sort of distinguish between two issues that come up. One issue is the integrity of the process. You call it fairness, right? Whether it's fair. The other issue is the result. And those are, you can have a scenario where you had a completely fair trial, right? You had a din Torah where the Dayan heard everything out, they heard all the tainis, but the result was not what you wanted because the din is not with you. And this happens a lot, and this is definitely results in a lot of disappointment when people have certain perceptions of what the law should be, the halacha should be, when it's not that way. This comes up in a lot of areas where there's some kind of, disagreement between what the poskim hold about certain issues, certain legal issues, and what lahavdil secular law hold, and people's perceptions are generally based on cultural assumptions which are from the Western world, which are not based on Jewish law. This comes up in many things. So regarding what we call the procedural issues and the fairness issues, that's one thing, and there's the issue of the substantive issues, the actual way that the Dayanim rule or lahavdil the judges are going to rule. On the issue of fairness and procedural fairness, I've heard complaints in all systems. And
even the private, meaning even the private Batei Din, you would say that in terms of procedure, I hear a lot of complaints about the private Batei Din. Each one has its own procedure. There's nothing which is really fixed. It's very flexible, and whereas in court things are more rigid. I mean, I guess you could read it both ways.
And that's a two-way street. That's a two-way street. Let me give you an example. Courts are very, very, very strong. Go strong with the idea of what they call in Hebrew Sofiyut Hadin. It's a principle that when there's a ruling, and the judge ruled in favor of one part or the other, you might have a right of appeal. But then after the appeal is exhausted, your case is over. You can't keep on going back to the court with new pieces of evidence. Halacha essentially does not accept that. Halacha essentially states that if you have new evidence, which you didn't have before, you can come back and ask for a retrial. And in Israel, under Israeli law, for example, a retrial will happen in such a case in criminal cases in very, very extenuating circumstances. There's a case that's in the media right now about DNA evidence that was uncovered, that there's a murder trial being reheard. But in civil cases, very, very rarely. It's got to be there was some kind of fraud perpetrated by one of the parties. So that's a huge difference. Now that goes both ways. On the one hand, a case can be reopened, and that can be annoying if you won your case, and the other guy is a nudnik and is coming back with, bothering the Dayanim to rehear the trial when the issues are largely settled. But if you think about it, from the other hand, if you're a person that you didn't have a piece of evidence, and the Dayanim ruled based on the evidence that was in front of them, and you want to get the right result based, and you show the Dayanim that you have this evidence, so your case will be reheard in the court. You wouldn't have ever had that opportunity. The judge will throw you out because there was res judicata. The case was settled. So that goes both. That goes both ways. That cuts both ways. The issue of the flexibility versus the formalism of the court. The courts. Look, I didn't mean to say that they're similar in the sense that they work the same way, but they didn't work very differently than courts. And this goes throughout the world, through all the Batei in the world, which if they're more formalistic or less formalistic, but as a trend they are less formalistic. As a trend, you'd like to hear the Balei Din more. In the Beis Din in Israel, the government, the Beit Din Rabbani, there's a series of takanot which guide how diyunim are heard, how the trials are supposed to be heard. In those takanot, it states that the first thing the Dayanim have to hear is the parties, the litigants. Right. Afterwards, they hear the lawyers or the Toyanim. Okay. In the court, it's the complete opposite. In the court, the judge doesn't want to hear from the litigants. The judge wants to hear from the lawyers. Only if
it's more adversarial system rather.
More so, and less of an impression of the litigants themselves, and that creates a little bit more of a shtibel. Yes, it creates more of a shtibel because you have a little more screaming and a little more emotions coming out. But you also have an opportunity to get information without the filter of the lawyers, and there's an advantage to that. But the point is that each system has its own way of doing things.
Okay, which specific problems would you say are unique to the Beis Din system then? What do we need to bear in mind? How can we try to find solutions to the specific problems in Beis Din? What would you identify as those?
Me as a practicing attorney have had two serious problems that came up. And then I'll mention a third issue, which I wouldn't call a problem, but it's a different approach that could be, for many clients, problematic. Problem number one, and this happens more in private Batei Dinim than the Israeli government Batei Dinim, but can happen in the Israeli government Batei Dinim, not giving a clear psak. Okay. If Reuven is stole money from Shimon, okay, and Shimon sues Reuven, at the end of the day, if the psak is correct, according to the din, there should be a psak saying Reuven has to pay Shimon such and such amount of money, what we call some certain, an exact amount.
But this is
that's what it should say.
This is the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah in Sanhedrin says, "Ish ploni," the last one I think, "Ish ploni ata zakai, ish ploni ata chayav." That's it. Like that's the psak.
It should be clear. It should be clear. You should be able to understand the psak without reference to anything else, any other background information. Unfortunately, I've seen many Batei Din that will give a psak saying whatever Reuven took from Shimon, he has to pay from him. Okay, that's good for the people who were in the hearing and heard all the facts to understand what that means. But when push comes to shove and you have to, what you call certify that...
You're saying not only do they not give reasons, but even the psak itself is inherently unclear, meaning you can't even make out the psak.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In terms of the issue of giving reasons...
You have this in professionals, Dayanim, meaning even in based, Batei Din with experience, and, they give psakim like, pay whatever you're chayiv, and that doesn't make sense.
I've seen Dayanim with 30 to 40 years of experience make that mistake. And it's almost just innocent. It was so obvious to them because they heard the case over and over and over. They knew that Shimon was claiming that Reuben took a certain amount of money from him, that it was unnecessary to even state it. But it is necessary. And why is it necessary? And this is the important point. The reasoning of the ruling doesn't really make much of a difference. Under Israeli law, I'll explain. Under Israeli law, you basically, to make it very simple, you cannot vacate. The court cannot vacate an arbitration award, like a Beis award from a private Beis based on the fact that they didn't like their reasoning. They don't get into that level. That's the point of arbitration. You go to an arbitrator, you go to Beis and whatever they think, that's their prerogative. However, they will get into the fact of what does the psak say? What does the psak say? For example, does the psak have the right litigants? There was a case of a gamach in Israel, and the gamach sued a person who had borrowed money from the gamach and didn't pay. Okay. Now, they went to a din Torah, and din Torah was gamach ploni versus almoini. Okay. There's a psak that said almoini has to pay money, and it said the amount of money to gamach ploni. The problem was that gamach ploni was, in the end of the day, not really the Baal Din of Amoini, it was the Baal Gamach. It was the individual who was running the Gamach. Okay, so the Psak said Gamach, but Gamach was not an entity, it wasn't a person, it was really just the alter ego of this individual. That's a Psak that you can't really use in Hotzah Lapa'al. In Israel, judgments are enforced by bringing them to the court, and then through Hotzah Lapa'al, it's like the equivalent of the sheriff in the United States. That Psak is unenforceable. Okay, so that's one problem. You mentioned the issue of...
But let me just ask you about the reasons, though. I mean, I find this personally very frustrating when Batei Din don't give their reasons, and I know that Pi Halacha, Cheshmish Bat Siman Yotes, that there's no
obligation to identify the...
There's no obligation. Yeah. I realize there's no obligation, but you would never get a court decision without giving you reasons, and the reasons at least it gives you the sense that the court has weighed up all the different relevant arguments properly and given a decision based on a careful consideration of them. If you don't have anything like that, it's hard to what do you do with this? You have no idea where it's coming from. Wouldn't you think it would be a good idea that Batei Din should make it standard to give the reasons?
Okay, so on that topic, first of all, you mentioned secular courts. Under Israeli law, if a court did not give the reasoning behind a ruling, that itself is automatic grounds of appeal. So the Israeli court system on the secular side does take putting in reasonings very, very seriously. To get into the exact reason how halacha developed this principle that you weren't required to give a reasoning is beyond the scope here. I would say that there is one advantage, that in theory you get a psak faster, right? You get a psak much faster. Instead of having to wait for judges to sit down and write rulings, they can work out the things and come up and say, this is my final result. Today was speaking with a colleague of mine who has a case, and they have been waiting 7 months for a ruling from a family court judge because she hasn't issued a ruling. And part of it is probably because there are certain complex legal issues that she has to, it's in Hebrew, but cross all her T's and dot all of her I's. And in some ways, justice.
In Batei Din, you never wait 7 months for a ruling.
You would wait, but it wouldn't be because they had to exactly write the psak in the right way. There are some Batei Din like that. Okay, I personally been involved with certain Batei Din like that, but it won't be because of the issue of writing the psak. It might be the issue of other technical issues, just in terms of docket management that comes up. Some Batei Din are much better with being on top of the cases. And a lot of that actually depends. This will sound very, prosaic and very simple, but it's actually just depends on the secretary of the Beis Din. It's the secretary on top of the Dayan and making sure that they're checking their cases, making sure things, the rulings are being written. But in terms of the reasoning, there's another issue of reasoning. It opens up a Pandora's box sometimes because, remember, halacha in its purest sense does not accept the idea of an appeal. Okay, when they introduced in the Batei Rabbanim in the Israeli official rabbinical courts, this is in pre-state mandatory Palestine, right? This is before the state of Israel. The British forced the Dayanim to introduce the idea of an appeal, and they created the Beit Hadin Gadol Iruvim. It was a huge polemic between the various poskim about whether or not such a thing is acceptable, because in principle, in the way we, the halacha, the basic halacha is that you don't start questioning other Beis Din. Now, what's the whole point? Why we have to have reasoning in secular rulings? Because if it was unappealable, then why do they have to put the reasoning? The reasoning is that you have to put the nimukei psak. They should be able to appeal. But if halacha doesn't really accept the idea of an appeal, so putting the reasoning is just essentially going to frustrate the Balei Din, because they'll get a psak they feel is wrong, and but they won't have any recourse. Now, of course, you can always go back and ask the Dayanim to revisit halacha accepts that idea if you felt that there was a clear intelligent psak, and under certain circumstances, a Dayan can be choizer from psak, and in some cases, you can be mechayev a Dayan for making a mistake in psak. The Shulchan Aruch already deals with under what are the conditions for that to happen. But having a lot of reasoning in a psak can sometimes create a situation where a person's very frustrated, right? And on the other hand, it'll just ask them to be mahar after the Dayan. So which is better, having a lot of reasoning where you can challenge the Dayanim, or having no reasoning where you're left in the black? The answer is, I think the right way to do it, and there are Batei Din like this, is to have a certain amount of reasoning. In other words, a certain amount of explanation how they got the psak, but not necessarily to go into that level of resolution like in Israeli court rulings, which are super lengthy. I mean, we're talking about in Israeli court cases, as opposed to American court cases, by the way. We're talking about Piskei Din of 60 pages, 100 pages. I used to work in the court, and I used to work in the court in Yerushalayim, and I worked for one of the judges there who consistently made 300-page rulings, which were great because they were like treatises. They were like almost like a PhD. But
he was enjoying himself, but the Tzadim were not enjoying it. Let me ask you about right. Yeah. Let me
by the way, if you don't mind, I want to interrupt you on one more point. This is more for Americans, less for people in Europe, but people from countries where they have a jury system for civil trials, okay, the jury doesn't give reasoning either. The jury comes up with a verdict. So in some ways, you do have legal issues that are settled, but the actual hachra, why we came to the decision that this person is chayav or not chayav, in America, you don't know. You have 12 people or 6 people in some places that just decided the way it is. So at least in America, you don't always get that advantage of an explanation for how they rule the way they rule.
Let me just while we're on the comparison between the Batei Din and the court system, it interests me to hear from you about the comparison between the way Dayanim function and the way attorneys function. The Dayanim in the Batei Din and attorneys in the courts, because of course in the courts you have your rules, and I guess attorneys are careful to abide by the rules. How does it work? How does that compare in terms of the function of each panel?
That's actually the second issue I want to bring up about Batei Din, which is a big concern. You have good Dayanim, you have bad Dayanim, you have ethical ones, you have bad lawyers, good lawyers. You have the whole gamut of just there's all kinds of people out there, and some are ethical, some are not ethical. The big issue is, and when it comes to Dayanim, and I mean Dayanim in private Batei Din in Israel and also Dayanim in America, there's nothing you can do if they do things that aren't ethical. If you see that they are perpetrating fraud on the Beis Din, who are you going to go to? It's not a criminal matter. There's no recourse. If it's an attorney, even an attorney in a Beis Din, even an attorney in an arbitration, you can file a grievance with the Bar Association. Now, I'm not encouraging people to go ahead and start, filing complaints with the Bar Association, but every lawyer
he knows that he can't get away with murder because
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And for this reason, there were a number of Batei Din that came up with limitations on who can represent in the Din Torah. The RCA Beis Din in America, the Beis Din of America, definitely has a rule like this. I believe the Rav Khan's Beis Din in Muncie has a similar limitation, where no problem, we'll let you come with the Toyin. That's okay. But the Toyin must be an attorney, because then we know that whatever is going to happen, but there is some sort of mirsa, some sort of of fear in that attorney to do things. And I've seen as an attorney serious frauds perpetrated on Batei Din and on courts. And I got to tell you, the fear of a grievance, okay, assuming that the other attorney is not some sort of sociopath and doesn't care about the law, but if it's an attorney that does care about his name and does care about getting complaints, even the threat, the unstated threat of a grievance based on being caught doing something that was fraudulent or unethical, that itself can get the person to either not do it or stop themselves at the last minute, or even go back to the Dayanim or to the Beis Din and apologize and state that they misrepresented something. And that is a huge difference between Batei Din and courts. And that is something that if I would, if it would ask me what kind of rules to make for Batei Din, to have it, whether we can limit Dayanim who are only lawyers, it's almost exertion because there aren't that many Dayanim. Definitely in America, there are not that many Dayanim in America who are also attorneys. In Israel, there's quite a number, but in America, there aren't. But it also might encourage some of the Dayanim to just simply go to law school and get admitted to the bar. It's, might not be the worst.
Either that, or you can have a proper accreditation for Dayanim, meaning you could get a proper, I think they have that in Israel, right? You can be a To'en Rabbani, an official To'en Rabbani, and then you could have a bar or the equivalent of a bar for Dayanim.
They have that. In America, due to issues of separation of church and state, that would never fly. But yeah, in Israel they have it. Is the the grievance board in the bar of the Dayanim as effective as in the Israel Bar Association? I would say not. It is definitely not as effective. But there is definitely in Israel there is a recourse for the Dayanim. In America, that's the Wild West. Tarte mashma. Over there in the west of the Atlantic, there's just everyone can put up a shingle, any person say that he's a Dayan, represent people and do whatever they have to do without any recourse. So I understand the Beis Din of America, and I'm partial to that approach in terms of limiting representation in the Beis Din.
So you mentioned a couple of the challenges or disadvantages of the Beis Din system and ways that might be improved. What would you say are the advantages of Beis Din? Of course, the basic advantage of going to Beis Din is that you're going to get Din Torah and you don't go to Arkais. But other than the basic halacha that you have to go to Beis Din, well, what are the advantages of the Beis Din system over what you see in the courts?
Okay, so this is especially true in the U.S., and I'll explain in a second why that is. The avoidance of Chilul Hashem. When you have a case in open court where anyone can access those documents, right? There's no limitation. The cases are under rare circumstances, they're under seal, but most cases, even matrimonial cases, are actually public. Anything that's there is on the record. And that can be a tremendous Chilul Hashem. It could also involve invasion of privacy, information getting out that people don't want to get out. When you're in a Beis Din, you're in a Din Torah, you're in a room with 3 Dayanim, and that's it. It doesn't go anywhere. In the end of the day, maybe the ruling will go to court, but that's just the ruling. It's not, the protocols. It's not the transcripts. It's not the evidence. That itself is a huge advantage, and it's true in America more than Israel. And I have to make a very important distinction between the kinds of Din Torahs that happen in Israel and America. And when I say America, I mean all of America. There's some cities that you have less of this, but in America, Din Torahs can be over millions and millions, or tens of millions, or even hundreds of millions of dollars. You have in America serious Hamish businessmen in New York that have all kinds of issues for many, many reasons, including not willing to expose their net worth and not wanting to have to get government authorities involved. They go to Din Torahs. That's where issues are settled. Issues of $50 million easily. In Israel, the din Torahs tend to be more about niskei shenim. This guy opened up a window. This guy wants to build another floor. Very rarely here in Israel do you actually have a din Torah of a lot of money. It happens, but not as common in America. By the way,
people don't trust the Batei din. They're too hamish, or they're too.
No. I think for another reason. I think that just Baruch Hashem, there's a lot of parnasa in America, and there are people there who are involved in business deals at that level.
The hamish olam in Eretz Israel just don't have the kind of. They don't have the.
And the ones who do already are the kinds of people that are just going to go to court. That's a sociological observation, not a halachic observation. But the result is that in America you have serious cases being heard.
Okay, but is it really a chilul Hashem though? What I mean is, everyone has disputes. Every community has issues and disputes and misunderstandings and contractual issues and so on. Going to court and dealing with it like everybody else is that such a chilul Hashem?
It's a huge chilul Hashem, and it's better even in this din pruta kedin mea, whether it's two guys fighting over whether or not who had the rights to the foreclosure in an apartment complex in Brooklyn, or whether some guy in Israel built without permission from the local municipality. Both are issues that is this kind of thing that people want to be exposed in the media and the secular courts. And there's a huge advantage. And again, there's also the privacy issue. And people are always looking for privacy. They don't want people to know exactly what, this is even a principle in Chazal, that there's a chazaka that people don't want other people to know how much money they have. So that's one huge advantage. And it's nothing to make light of. It is consider that when you go to court, you are putting your whole story on the internet. That's what's happening, especially if it's in federal court in America, where it's extremely easy to access any federal document in any case. And I got to tell you personally, when I have to do a research on someone or a business thing or clients consult with me, I go into the federal court website and I just see if they appear anywhere. And I find about bankruptcies, I find about all kinds of interesting information that people never dreamed would be on the internet. Okay, so that's one point. Another point is just which is a reason, even if you have some.
Even if you have a grievance with a non-Jew, trying to take him to Beis first, maybe he'll agree.
So I got to tell you something. In Israel, so believe it or not, but there's a Beis Din called Nesivos Chaim, which has handled many din Torahs with Arabs, with non-Jews, and they like it. They like the efficiency. They like also the.
Nesivos Chaim is Rabbi Fleischman and his.
Fleischman, yeah. Rabbi Fleischman has a kollel, and as part of the kollel he has this Beis Din, and I know for a fact that many Arabs, and believe it or not, Arabs against Jews, believe it or not, which is kind of surprising, but really? They appreciate it. Yes, they appreciate it, and also probably for it's under the radar screen. It's less exposure. And you're not going to have some. I've seen cases where judges even threaten people. They're saying, what you did was borderline, illegal. The judge even will threaten them to go to the police. Even when it wasn't even criminal.
Right, the Arabs would prefer to avoid the official channels. They want to stay away from the official state channel. Interesting.
Look, they have their own. By the way, they have their own systems of Qadi courts where they do it also, but there were cases where they went to the Beis Din. Okay, that's one reason besides the obvious reason, lifneim v'lo lifnei akum, why a person should go to a Beis Din. But there's another thing people have to realize: as expensive as Ta'anim can get, and Ta'anim can get very expensive, right? There are Ta'anim in New York, billing by the hour, several $100s an hour. That does not come close to Manhattan attorneys billing over $1,000 an hour. Okay, you look at a case in America, where attorney's fees take you in a simple civil case, it can get to $100,000 faster than you realize, and you simply don't have the money to do the case. A Beis Din is much simpler. Yes, Ta'anim are expensive, but again, it's a fraction of what will cost. And you can actually get a result that you want, get adjudication, get an answer. Sometimes people just want the answer on the case; they want the clarity, right? You want to win, but even if you don't win, at least the issue was settled. That you can get for a lot less money in Batei Din than it will cost. Then it's going to cost through the court system. That's true in America. In Israel, attorneys' fees are not as high as in America. You also don't have as much, depositions and all these other.
But you have a huge difference in just paying for opening the case. Just signing the case for a Beis Din costs you, I don't know, $50 or something, and whereas filing a case in court could be very expensive.
And that is a point in Eretz Yisrael that I made to a number of my clients that wanted to go to the secular court. They had a 10 million shekel claim. And I said, listen, that's a huge claim. Do you know what you're going to be paying for that? Just for the filing fee. And they had to get, they asked the court to get, a dispensation. The court, if you could prove indigency that you don't have the money, they can give you a discount. But you're still going to put down tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of shekels on a huge case like that. And that is now there is one Beis Din I should add in Israel, the Beis Din of Eretz Chemda Gazit, where they copied the Israeli court model and do charge a percentage. I believe the point is to discourage frivolous lawsuits. That people shouldn't just file like a 10 million shekel lawsuit against someone. They want to show people are serious, but in the end of the day, they do require a court fee based on a percentage, and that is a huge difference. So you're right. In America, maybe that's not as much of an issue, but in Israel, definitely, how much the Batei didn't charge? 200 shekels a hearing, 100 shekels a hearing. It's very, very inexpensive. It's very fair. By the way, between the Israeli government Batei Din and the family courts, right? There's two parallel systems in Israel where family court cases, the divorce cases are heard, not the divorce itself, but the custody and the child support. The court fees in the Israeli in the Beis Din are much lower than in the secular courts. And I don't think that's a reason people would go to one another, but it was interesting that we saw the same trend over there. That's another reason. So the efficiency in terms of the cost of running a case is much lower. There's another issue. We talked before about the flexibility and the formality. Beis Din can be a lot more flexible. Okay, right. If Dayanim have to go somewhere, they have to go to a construction site. It's easier to get them, pay a taxi.
For a few minutes. Right.
Yeah, go try to get an Israeli judge to visit a place. Now, there are some judges like that, like the judge I worked for. He was the kind of person that would get in his car and go somewhere and, give a court decision allowing him to do it, and he would see the facts on the ground. Most judges, keep that distance. They don't have that formality. In general, Beis Din is much more Heimish. It's much more at home. People can speak a little freer, right? For better or for worse, sometimes results in a lot of screaming and yelling, which isn't so great. But it can make people feel more comfortable and less intimidated. I'm in court all the time. I don't get intimidated, right? For me to get intimidated, maybe in the Israeli Supreme Court because I don't appear there so much. So for me, it would be, like an intimidating experience. But the regular courts, I'm there all the time. It's just, it's like basically, going to shul for me.
It's pretty Hamish also.
Yeah.
No, I understand.
But for one second, for the litigant, I know that they are scared. My clients are always scared when they walk into court. In the Beis Din, they feel it much less, much less. And that's another advantage, which psychological advantage, but it's there.
Let me just ask you about that. To drill down on that point of the Hamishkeit, isn't the Hamishkeit also a potential problem in the sense that there are some Balei Din, some litigants that will feel Hamish with the Dayan. Let's say the Dayan is a Belzer Chassid. So and you have one of the Stodom is a Belzer Chassid. So he'll feel very Hamish with the Dayanim or with this Dayan. But the other side might be some a Litvish guy or Kalino, I don't know, somebody who's not so Hamish with Bel Chasidim. And then the actual Hamishkeit itself is very particular, meaning some people will be Hamish and some others, and especially in this is true for civil cases, but Kal v'chomer for divorce cases. Doesn't this kind of Hamishkeit have an inherent disadvantage in terms of some people feeling more comfortable and some people feeling less comfortable, and also less understood perhaps in a cultural sense or in a kind of distance between the Dayan and one of the Stadim's world. Perhaps in an internal community based in this won't happen, but Dayanim have to serve a range of communities and a wide range of people. Certainly in Israel, isn't this an inherent problem in the Beis Din?
It's an inherent problem and an inherent advantage. And a lot will depend on how the Beis Din is constructed. Let's first talk about Batei Din that are not sectorial, right? Not Machzikei Das Bells, not the Eidach Haredis, which is the Yerushalayim. Like I mentioned, Sivas Chaim, there's Yashav Tov, there's Busha Weiss's Beis Din. There's also
or the state Batei Din.
or most of Batei Din in America. The best Beis Din, and there are many like this, has the Litvak, has the Chassid, has the Kanoi, has the more modern guy. You put them all together, and what advantage do you get? You have an advantage. The Hamishkeit works there as an advantage when you have a mix, because there'll be a Dayan in the Herkev, in the panel of Dayanim, that will understand things that you wouldn't understand if you're not from that community. Okay, there is definitely a huge amount of cultural misunderstanding, and by the way, this is for sure true in the Israeli courts, because Israeli judges come from a certain socioeconomic background. They do not understand what it's like to be a poor person. They do not. They don't even understand what it's like to be part of the working class. There's huge cultural gaps from the court. Now, the Batei Din, you don't have that. Now, the disadvantage is that you go to Din Torah, and the Dayan was a mechutin with your wife's first cousin's son-in-law, all right? And that can be a problem. It can be a problem. It can be a problem even if no one said anything. It could be a problem if someone, after Kiddush, threw out a line to that Dayan, oh yeah, you have a Din Torah with my cousin's mechutin, etc. It can be a problem. It can be a problem, and it's that's the kind of thing. As a Torah, you have to be very aware and sensitive that there's no conflicts of interest and no issues like that. And I've seen cases, and unfortunately, one of those conflicts of interest cases actually went to the district court in Israel, and the court invalidated a psak because of that type of a conflict of interest, and it was a big Chilul Hashem that it came out. But there is the Heimishkeit can be very good. It can be very good, but it's got to be done right. It's got to be done that, as I said, there's a mix in the, especially in Eretz Yisrael, there's a lot of Svardim. There should be, a Svardi on the Beis Din to give, to understand, they'll understand certain things that other people from other kehillos won't understand. Now, you mentioned another type of case, which is a very dangerous type of thing, and this is where you really need a Dayan to guide you in a Din Torah, where you wind up in a sectorial Beis Din with a person from that kehillah and you're not from that kehillah. And that happens. It does happen. It should never happen because you just, in the halacha is halacha nitba, right? And normally between just the sort of pre-trial phase where people choose a Din Torah, so if the nitba wants a sectorial Beis Din, the Tuvya will say that I can't go there because it's your kehillah.
But number one, not every mitzvah is necessarily so savvy, and you also sometimes have the Batei Din of the state Batei Din, meaning in Israel you have the state sanctuary Batei Din, and then you might. So
I'm talking about the momentous cases in Israel, like financial cases which are heard about Batei Din. But between a zabla or they'll find whatever. Sometimes
you'll find
the case. Right. I'll tell you where it really comes up is where a person does a business deal with someone, signs a contract. In the contract is what we call an arbitration clause, which says that every issue will be settled by this Rav or by this Beis Din. And that's where you can fall into, because the person who wrote the contract didn't choose that Beis Din by accident. Okay? All right? And that's something you have to watch out for. Now, you mentioned the state Batei Din. One of the unique features of the state Batei Din in Israel, which is, in my mind, a great advantage, is that there's no games of choosing which Beis Din or not. Basically, there's a map. If you live in certain cities, you're put in certain Batei Din. And that's how it works. And then you're given a randomly assigned Dayanim in that Beis Din. Okay, so if you live in Rehovot, you get the Rehovot Beis Din. You live in Yerushalayim, you get the Yerushalayim Beis Din. And you can't start saying, I want to go to Beis.
If the Dayanim are all, let's say, they're all Hamish Dayanim, and the woman that's fighting for divorce is modern Orthodox, that me, or secular for that matter. You can have a real, lack of understanding, as it were, between the Dayanim and the litigants.
I agree with that completely. But I'll add that, like I said before, in the secular courts you have that same thing. I'll tell you where this came up. This issue came up a lot with ruling on child support. The family courts, historically, it's changed in the past year and a half, but gave very just large amounts of child support awards. And it made no sense. This was a family that was living on a certain kind of budget, and now the court rules that the father, and traditionally the father had to pay an amount of child support that was more than that they ever spent on their kids when they were together. Why was that? Because the judge was used to a salary, a respectable salary, university educated. So that cultural disconnect happens really wherever you're going to go. Now, the particular issue that comes up, which is would be a little more sensitive topic, but I would call connections or things like that, that is something where it's very useful to have a Dayan, but not just a Dayan, but a Dayan who's familiar with that Bezdin. They will be able to spot any kinds of conflicts of interest. And I can tell you that, especially now in Israel, in the state government of Batei, when there is a conflict of interest, the Dayanim will recuse themselves. It happened to me 3 months ago. There was a conflict of interest due to a family connection or that kind of a thing. The case was...
And the Dayanim brought this up themselves, but without the Dayan bringing it up. The Dayanim themselves brought this up.
Because again, in Israel, the Dayanim, like you mentioned, the Dayanim here, are also subject to grievances, and they usually are happy to be makdim or for kodem mamaka and not have to wait till one of the parties. Or sometimes they'll raise the issue and say, listen, they'll put everything on the table. They'll say the father of the boy.
Do you agree for us to carry on, given the fact that there's some connection or some friendship or some, I don't know, my wife's cousin knows whatever.
Yeah, they'll put it on the table, and that can be very helpful. However, it is definitely an issue. There is no question, even if it's not a technical reason to invalidate the Dayan or to get them to recuse themselves. This issue that you mentioned of the Hamishkeit and the fact that everyone davens in the same shul is definitely an issue. It definitely comes up. It's just the Jewish world is very small. The Frum world is a very small world. Everyone, if the degrees of separation between anyone in the Frum world is probably no more than 1 or 2, right? And that means that that very likely, if you don't know the Dayan yourself, you know someone who knows the Dayan, and that goes for the other side. It's definitely an issue. It's definitely a concern. And again, but again, as I said, there's also an advantage. They do know the party. Now you mentioned a different case, which I want to mention about secular people in private Batei Din. A very interesting anecdote, which I had a secular client of mine. Most of my clients are from, just miteva dvarim. That's how it works. But I had a client who wasn't from. It was actually a divorce agreement where both parties agreed. There was no litigation, but I followed them through the agreement and through the get. We did the get, and my client comes to me, the wife, and says she didn't understand why she didn't do anything throughout the whole get. I said, what do you mean? Well, I didn't do anything. The husband was sitting there telling the sofer to write, appointing the Eidim, being mevatel moedoyos, doing heter, doing ataras nedarim, and he was running around with the sofer, doing all this stuff. All the men were doing things. Me as a woman, I did nothing. Now it was interesting to me. It was eye opener because that's something that no firm person in the system would have ever thought about. Right. Of course, that's the woman does. She receives the get, right? She receives the get. Now she has to. By the way, receiving is a huge act. That's an act that cannot be accomplished without her consent, but it is very passive. A lot of those perceptions on the part of secular people, if you have proper training of Dayanim, okay, you can help them. And I've seen Dayanim who are a little, and after that story, I noticed there were certain Dayanim that were a little more attuned to secular people.
More sensitive to the sensitivities of right. I understand.
Now, look, it wasn't like they have in the more modern world or in the Lahavdil Reform Conservative world where by marriages they had 2 ring ceremonies. So no one's going to do a 2-get ceremony where the wife gives the husband. No one's going to do that, right? But there was definitely Dayanim that knew that it was an uncomfortable situation for the secular people.
To explain more, to talk us through it, to give her the support or the emotional support, whatever it is. Right,
exactly, and they know how to present it. Yeah, exactly.
We're going to have to finish because we've been going for a while. Just a final thing, you've been in America for years, you've been in Israel for years. Give me, the 2 cents on, where would you rather go to the Torah? What are the basic, but really the 2-cent version of this question.
A specific Bezdin, or you mean in which country would I rather go?
Which country?
Okay. Listen, say that I'm a Zionist with a lowercase z or a capital Z. Say that I'm, just whatever you want to say. I like a lot of the Batei Din in Eretz Yisrael. I find that, I'll tell you why, very simple. I find that the Dayanim that come to the Batei Din in Eretz Yisrael tend to be Talmidei Chachamim and Dayanim, okay, who themselves could have been a Dayan, And therefore, it makes the cases a bit, in my mind, on a higher level. Now, remember, we're not talking about a lot of money. Usually the cases are not a lot of money, but I do find that it's on a higher level. I'm not saying there aren't Talmidei Chachamim who are Tanaim in America. I'm not saying there aren't things, but from what I've seen, I was a little underwhelmed by many of the things. Again, my experience is mostly here, but definitely in Eretz Yisrael. And in specific, I mentioned a number of Batei Din, in specific Batei Din that I very much appreciate in terms of just the Seder and how they run them, but there are up and coming Batei Din in America that are doing very good jobs, and I've heard great things about certain Batei Din, new Batei Din in America that are just a little more streamlined,
Right.
aware of the issues that come up. But yeah, definitely Eretz Yisrael. There's no question.
In terms of divorce cases, then of course it's completely incomparable. Eretz Yisrael, this is the state court, so you get a summons, and if you don't give a get, you get put into prison. It's a whole different world.
America is a disaster. America is a walking time bomb when it comes to divorce issues, because there are people running around, rogue Dayanim, doing getting or giving heter abundance or matter women to marry without a get, without any basis, without having trials, without having proper din Torahs, and it's just it's really, really problematic. In Eretz Yisrael, for whatever criticism people have on the system, and there's a lot of criticism, but we have a system, we have checks and balances, right? We have, as you said, the ability to put people in jail, the ability to force people to compel people to carry out the Pesach Din. In America, it's Ish Kol Yasher Ben Aviaseh, and it's really Vahibi Meshvoi to Shoftim in America. And
really
I don't see.
This is strong Zionist. You're really slamming America here.
I wouldn't. It's not America per se, but I'll tell you something. In Europe, right, and in England and in South Africa and in most countries in the world, you also can't force someone to go to a Beis Din. But there is one thing that they have. They have centralized Batei Din. London Beis Din in London. You do have Kadasi also, but basically London Beis Din is the
Federation,
Beis Din.
right? But,
you have a federation, but London Beis Din is basically whatever. The Consistoire in Paris. You have in Antwerp. You have but you have established kahilas, right? One of the issues in America that it's just historically how it developed, they never were able to establish kahilas. Now, there are certain cities that did better. Baltimore, Yermalus Chusa of Baltimore, it has its own Beis Din. It's a little more centralized, okay? But basically, in most cities, there's no central authority, and it creates a lot of problems, and unfortunately, I don't see a way out of it. I think there's just too many hashkafic and cultural gaps between the various kahilas. I just can't see Sachtas or Abanim getting together with the RCA and sitting down and saying, okay, we have to make Seder about Gittin. I just don't see that happening, and it's unfortunate.
I heard recently that the Israeli law decided that Israel has jurisdiction over Jewish marriages, even if the marriage was done abroad. So what you're saying is, if you want to get out of trouble, just come to Israel. And Israel is
a much better place if you want to get a psak enforced in the area of divorce. It is a much better place to do, because it simply you have the force of the law behind you, and not just the goodwill of the parties. So that's a huge, it's a sea change between the different countries. And again, America with all of the separation of church and state, I don't see any way that can be changed in a legal way. So unfortunately, that's how it is.
Good, Tuvya, many thanks for joining us. Been a
thank you for having me.
Discussion. Thank you very much. Speak to you soon.
I appreciate it. Be well.
Bye.
Let's go to the chosen winner of this week's riddle.
I have the answer to the riddle. My name's Binyomin, by the way. Two things. First of all, it could be that the Rambam's only talking about Vikim, about men who have the Torah, the but I think you could also say that because the Pasuk needs to tell us like from Matzeva, Dafka over here, something special over here that there's a Matzeva, and that would be that, as we know, and we need that the Kevarach is a place to daven, and Kaisal came out of Godos and all kinds of Torah. We go to daven there, and that's why he put them up there. They're dafka for the Kevarach, so we could daven at the cave. Nothing to do with the Koran and the memory of the tzaddiks, only in order that we should know where this cave is in order to daven. Thank you for your. Bye.